Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome to the first card in my series called Homemade Techniques. My goal during this series is to use items found around the house to make cards. For my first session, I'm going to be using Reynolds Wrap as well as some twine from the kitchen to make this card. I just use plain old Reynolds Wrap, not the thick kind, but you could try the thick kind. I had good luck with just the regular kind. I'll be using my EZ Tack repositionable spray adhesive. I cut a piece of Neenah Solar White cardstock to 2 3/4 inches high by 5 1/2, and I put it in a box on my craft table. And I'm going to give it a pretty good spray. I'm probably a little bit too close because I'm trying to get it in the camera. And the fumes weren't too bad in my craft room. So I'm going to move that to a piece of scratch paper with my tweezers. For my video, I'm substituting kitchen twine with this lawn fawn twine. My twine from the kitchen got lost in the move, so I just had to use this instead, which is kind of a waste because it's such a pretty twine to put it underneath tinfoil. But what you're going to do is you're just going to cut off several pieces that span the length of this piece of cardstock and just position them any way you want. I decided to do kind of a random swirly pattern. This repositionable adhesive spray is really easy to use. It's not sticky at all. I mean, it's sticky to the twine, but it's not sticky on your fingers. It doesn't make a mess at all. The first time I did this card, I actually used Tombow Mono Multi Glue, and I drew my lines with the glue, and then I put the string on top of it. And it was a little bit messy, and it took a little bit longer to do. And then I remembered that this would be a great way to adhere the string. So you could do different patterns. You can do straight lines, you can do flowers, you can form an image. There are lots of different things you can do with this. I'm just gonna speed through the rest of this. The first card I created, I had less pieces, so my pieces were spread out a little bit more and I had less colors, and I think it looked a little bit better. I think it is a little bit too busy with all the different pieces I put on here, so if I had to do it again, I would probably put maybe 2/3 as many pieces as I have on this one that I'm doing right. You could even do these horizontally or make circles, so many different things. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is just make sure that all of my string is really secured on the edges before I cut my string off. So then I'll just take these are my craft scissors by Stampin' Up. Make sure you get really nice sharp scissors because you don't want to kind of struggle with it and then it'll take it off the adhesive. Like I did a little bit right here. All right, once you get that all cut off, it's time to put the tinfoil on. So I'm just going to grab a piece. I'm going to be careful not to wrinkle it too much. And I'm going to start on one side and work my way to the other side. So I'm starting on the left, and I'm going to press it down with my fingers, and I'm going to make sure that I get as close to the string as possible, which is why I'm starting on one side and working my way across, because I don't want it sticking to the right, because then I might get some air bubbles in there because I don't have it adhered all the way straight across. If you do get air bubbles, then you're gonna probably have some issues with the coloring because you might break your tin foil. So you want it to be as close to the cardstock and the twine as possible without any gaps. And I'm just gonna press really hard on it. And the Reynolds Wrap will wrinkle a little bit in some areas. You just can't avoid it because you're going up and down and at different angles. But just try to minimize it as much as you can. So I'm going to work my way all the way until I get to the right and make sure all my edges are nice and clean. And you could take a scissor next to cut off this excess, but I was afraid to use my scissors on tinfoil, so I just decided to rip it myself. And I'm being really careful with my left hand to make sure I don't rip any off of my cardstock. I'm just going to go all the way around in a circle here and just leave probably maybe 1/4 inch or maybe 1/2 inch. And then I'm just going to fold it to the back, and I just didn't want it to be too bulky. I found that it really wasn't hard to get a sharp corner because this Reynolds Wrap is pretty thin. You might have a little bit more trouble with the thicker Reynolds Wrap when you do that. Once I get it all wrapped around, I'm just going to make sure everything is flat, I don't have any gaps, and I smooth out as many of the wrinkles as I can. And so there is my final product. I'm ready to color. So what I did was I grabbed all of the darkish colors from my Copic marker collection. The lighter colors don't look as pretty, I found. So what I did was I lined them up in rainbow order. I had pinks and reds to start. then orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple, and I kind of ended with a purpley red at the end. And when you color this tin foil, it's going to seem like it's not drying, and it does take a few minutes to dry. Just don't touch it. If you start getting streaks, then wait a minute, let it dry for a second, and then go back in with a second layer. That'll help. If you're having ink pool up, then you can wipe it off with a cloth or your finger or whatever and start over. So until it dries, it's very easy to start over. You just wipe it off, no big deal. And try to avoid getting it on the areas with string, because I'm trying to leave those just silver. And if you do, you could just wipe it off before it dries. I'm going back and forth between my chisel tip and my fine tip, depending on what area I need to color. So if it's a small area, I'm switching to my fine point. And another tip while you're coloring here is not to put too much pressure, because if you do have an air bubble somewhere that you hadn't noticed and you put too much pressure on the tin foil, because I've got the thin version of the tin foil, it's going to crack it or tear it, and you don't want that. As far as colors go, I literally just went to my box and I pulled out all of the dark colors that I had and arranged them in rainbow order. So I would just go to your collection and just pull out whatever you have. You can do some tests on tinfoil, because some of them actually look a lot lighter than you think once you put them on the tinfoil. And just play around with it and also figure out how many colors you're going to need. I did not count, and so at the end I was sort of missing a few colors and I had to just go find a few so the pattern didn't look as good as I had wanted it to. So anyway, so you might want to count up your markers in advance. All right, so here is my finished product. I really like the way this looks. It's really interesting. So I'm using the Sketchy Banner Greetings. It's a big, long sentiment by Simon Says Stamp. I'm going to ink it up with some Versamark ink. I'm going to use the corner of my Bazzill 40-pound, I think it's 40-pound vellum. Sprinkle it with some white embossing powder. And for those of you who have a Stampin' Up! Heat tool like I do, what I like to do first is I put it on the highest setting. So it's on number 2 right now. After it has warmed up for, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds, then I go down to the number 1 setting, which kind of turns off the massive heat coming out, and it still heats it up in pretty good time, but it reduces the warping significantly. I trimmed the bottom on my paper trimmer, and now I'm going to adhere this to the middle of my tinfoil piece with some glue dots. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a paper piercer and kind of folding them up so it's a little bit smaller, and then I'm going to kind of figure out where I can put these glue dots behind the sentiment so you won't see them. So I found a good place to put it behind the U, and I'm putting it on top of the string pieces. And for the first one, I'm just going to put it on the tin foil and then lay my sentiment on so I get it positioned correctly. And then for all future ones, I'm going to grab the glue dots, so fold it and then pick it up. And then I'm going to lift up my vellum, put it underneath there, and then I'm going to use the vellum to kind of release it from my paper piercer. After the first couple, you can still adjust it a little bit, and then I'm going to move on. I'll show you one more. So I'm going to grab my glue dot, and these are micro glue dots. They're, I think, 1/8 of an inch wide. And so I'm going to pick up my vellum, put it underneath where I want on top of the string, and then press my vellum down and remove it with my paper piercer. And I'm going to work this all the way across till I get to the end. And I'm just doing it underneath the letters so you can't see them. Now once I get to the end, I'm going to really carefully fold it over with a nice, crisp, clean fold. And then I'll trim off a little bit of this excess. And then I'm going to grab my tape runner, my big ATG tape runner, and put a little bit on the back here so that I could adhere the vellum. And I just want to take a second here to show you how pretty and shiny all these colors look on the tin foil. You can see the reflection. All right, then I'm going to take this panel. I'm going to put some tape runner on it. It is a little bit hard to get that tape runner on the tinfoil, but just kind of move in the opposite direction of the tinfoil so you're not pushing it back over the cardstock. And then I have a piece of Neenah Solar White 5.5 by 4.25 folded, and put that right in the middle. And I always like to outline my cards. I do this a lot. So I just take a ruler and a Stampin' Up! Black marker, and I'm just going to draw one black line at the top and one black line at the bottom, and it just sort of frames my design. And that is the card for today. So I hope you enjoyed that, something completely different, and I look forward to the next session. See you next time.